The morning sun blazed mercilessly over Camp Pendleton as Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez adjusted her combat gear for the third time. The weight of her equipment felt heavier today, though she couldn't quite understand why. At 28, Maria had served her country for nearly a decade, earning respect through countless deployments and training exercises. Her fellow Marines knew her as someone who never backed down from a challenge, never complained about the heat, and never showed weakness. Today marked the beginning of a grueling 3-day field exercise that would test the limits of every Marine in Bravo Company. 500 Marines had gathered for what their commanding officer called the most demanding training operation of the year. The exercise would simulate real combat conditions in the desert, complete with sleep deprivation, minimal water rations, and constant physical challenges. Maria stood among her squad, watching as younger Marines nervously checked their gear. Private Jenkins, barely 19 and fresh from boot camp, looked particularly anxious. She remembered being in his position years ago, feeling the mixture of excitement and terror that came with proving oneself worthy of the Marine Corps Eagle, Globe, and Anchor. "You doing okay there, Jenkins?" Maria asked, her voice carrying the authority earned through years of service. "Yes, Staff Sergeant," Jenkins replied, though his voice betrayed his nerves. "Remember what I taught you about hydration. Drink water before you feel thirsty. The desert doesn't forgive mistakes." What Maria didn't mention was her own struggle with following that advice lately. For the past few weeks, she had been experiencing strange symptoms that she attributed to stress. Occasional dizziness, fatigue that seemed deeper than normal post-exercise tiredness, and a persistent feeling that something wasn't quite right with her body. Being a Marine meant pushing through discomfort, so she had dismissed these warning signs as part of the job. The company commander, Lieutenant Colonel Thompson, began addressing the assembled troops. His voice carried across the formation as he outlined the mission parameters. They would be conducting simulated urban warfare operations in temperatures expected to reach 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Water would be strictly rationed to simulate real combat conditions where resupply might not be available. "This exercise will separate the strong from the weak," Thompson announced. "Every one of you volunteered to be a Marine. Today, you prove you deserve that title." Maria felt a surge of pride mixed with determination. She had been through hell and back in Afghanistan, survived IED explosions that claimed the lives of good Marines, and carried wounded comrades to safety under enemy fire. A training exercise in California couldn't possibly be more challenging than what she had already endured. As the company moved out toward the training area, Maria noticed the heat seemed more oppressive than usual. The desert landscape stretched endlessly before them, broken only by mock buildings constructed to simulate urban combat environments. The sun had barely risen above the horizon, yet she could already feel sweat forming beneath her helmet. The first phase of the exercise involved a 10-mile march in full combat gear. Maria had completed this distance countless times, often while carrying additional equipment or helping struggling Marines maintain pace. Today felt different somehow. Each step seemed to require more effort than it should have. Her breathing became labored earlier than expected, and she found herself consciously focusing on maintaining her typical stride. Private Jenkins marched beside her, occasionally glancing over with concern. Other Marines in her squad began to notice subtle changes in their staff sergeant's demeanor, though none dared to comment. In Marine culture, showing weakness or asking for help was seen as failure, especially for someone in a leadership position. During the march, Maria reflected on her journey to this moment. Growing up in a working-class family in Texas, she had joined the Marines to escape poverty and prove herself capable of anything. Her father had been skeptical about his daughter's military ambitions, worried that the physical demands would be too much. Maria had spent years proving him wrong, excelling in every training program and earning commendations for her service in combat zones. She thought about her younger sister Carmen, who looked up to her as a role model. Carmen often spoke about following in Maria's footsteps, joining the military to serve her country. Maria felt the weight of that responsibility, knowing that her actions reflected not only on herself, but on all the young women who saw her as proof that they could succeed in traditionally male-dominated fields. The heat continued to intensify as the morning progressed. What had started as discomfort gradually evolved into something more concerning. Maria's vision began to blur slightly at the edges, and she felt an unusual lightheadedness that she couldn't shake. She increased her water intake, hoping to combat what she assumed was early dehydration, but the symptoms persisted. Halfway through the march, the company stopped for a brief tactical review. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson used the break to discuss the next phase of the exercise, which would involve house-to-house clearing operations in the mock urban environment. Maria used the opportunity to check on her Marines, ensuring they were hydrating properly and maintaining their equipment. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," called out Corporal Martinez, one of her most reliable Marines. "You look a little pale. Everything okay?" Maria forced a smile and straightened her posture. "Nothing I can't handle, Martinez. Focus on your own readiness." The exchange reminded her of countless similar moments throughout her career. Marines looked out for each other, but they also expected their leaders to be invincible. Admitting weakness, especially during a high-visibility training exercise, could damage her reputation and potentially impact her career advancement opportunities. As the company resumed movement toward the training area, Maria made a conscious decision to push through whatever was affecting her. She had overcome greater challenges before. This would be no different. She thought about the Marines under her command who were counting on her leadership, the junior enlisted personnel who looked to her as an example of Marine Corps excellence. The mock urban environment came into view as they crested a small hill. Concrete structures designed to simulate Middle Eastern architecture rose from the desert floor. The realistic training facility had been constructed to provide Marines with the most authentic preparation possible for overseas deployments. Maria had trained here dozens of times, leading her Marines through complex scenarios designed to test their tactical proficiency and decision-making under pressure. Today's exercise would be particularly challenging because it combined physical stress with mental demands. Marines would need to clear buildings while managing their equipment, communicating effectively with their teams, and making split-second decisions about potential threats. The added stress of heat and limited water would test their ability to maintain focus when their bodies were pushed to their limits. As Bravo Company approached the staging area, Maria felt another wave of dizziness wash over her. This time, it was accompanied by a strange tingling sensation in her extremities and an overwhelming feeling of nausea. She steadied herself by placing a hand on her rifle, hoping the momentary weakness would pass unnoticed. The company formed up in squad formations, preparing to receive final instructions before beginning the urban warfare simulation. Maria took her position at the front of her squad, maintaining the bearing expected of a staff sergeant despite the growing concern about her physical condition. She looked out at the faces of the Marines under her command, seeing a mixture of determination, anxiety, and trust in their eyes. Private Jenkins caught her attention with a subtle gesture, pointing toward his water bottle and then toward her. The young Marine had noticed something was wrong and was silently offering assistance. Maria appreciated the concern but shook her head slightly, indicating that she was fine. In reality, she was far from fine, but admitting that fact seemed impossible given the circumstances. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson began his final briefing, explaining the complex scenario they would face. The simulation involved multiple objectives, time constraints, and realistic opposition forces designed to challenge their tactical abilities. Maria tried to focus on the instructions, but found her concentration wavering in ways that alarmed her. She had always prided herself on her ability to maintain focus regardless of external conditions. During her deployment to Afghanistan, she had led Marines through complex operations while under actual enemy fire, never losing track of mission objectives or the safety of her personnel. The fact that she was struggling to concentrate during a training exercise suggested that something was seriously wrong. The urban warfare simulation began with the sharp blast of a whistle that echoed across the training facility. Maria's squad moved with practiced precision toward their assigned building, weapons at the ready and communication flowing smoothly between team members. Despite her growing physical distress, Maria's training took over, and she found herself automatically executing the movements that had become second nature through years of repetition. The first building presented a standard clearing scenario. Maria positioned her Marines at entry points while she coordinated their advance through hand signals and whispered commands. The concrete structure radiated heat like an oven, adding to the oppressive desert temperature that had already pushed several Marines to their limits. Sweat poured down Maria's face beneath her helmet, but she maintained her focus on the mission. "Martinez, take point on the stairwell. Jenkins, cover the rear," she whispered into her radio, her voice still steady despite the tremor she felt building inside her chest. The squad moved through the building methodically, clearing each room according to Marine Corps doctrine. Maria felt a surge of pride watching her Marines perform flawlessly under pressure. Private Jenkins, who had seemed so nervous that morning, was executing his movements with confidence and precision. Corporal Martinez displayed the leadership qualities that would serve him well in future promotions. As they reached the second floor of the building, Maria experienced another wave of dizziness that was more intense than anything she had felt earlier. The walls seemed to shimmer slightly, and she had to brace herself against a door frame to maintain her balance. The episode lasted only a few seconds, but it left her feeling shaken and increasingly concerned about her condition. "Staff Sergeant, you sure you're okay?" Martinez asked quietly, having noticed her momentary pause. "Keep moving," Maria replied, deflecting the question while pushing herself to continue the mission. The squad completed their building clearing exercise and moved to the next objective, a simulated marketplace where they would face opposition forces armed with training ammunition. The scenario was designed to test their ability to distinguish between combatants and civilians while maintaining tactical discipline under stress. Maria had led similar exercises countless times, but today everything felt more challenging than it should have. The marketplace simulation proved particularly demanding. Mock civilians moved through the area while role-playing opposition forces attempted to engage the Marines from concealed positions. Maria's squad had to navigate the complex environment while protecting innocent bystanders and neutralizing threats. The exercise required constant communication, split-second decision-making, and physical agility as they moved between cover positions. During a particularly intense firefight simulation, Maria felt her vision begin to tunnel. The sounds around her became muffled, as if she were hearing them through thick glass. She recognized these symptoms as warning signs of a serious medical issue, but the training exercise was reaching its climax, and her Marines needed her leadership to complete the mission successfully. "Contact left!" shouted Martinez as opposition forces engaged them from a flanking position. Maria tried to respond with tactical instructions, but her voice came out weaker than intended. She forced herself to speak louder, maintaining the command presence her Marines expected while fighting against her body's obvious distress signals. The conflict between her duty as a leader and her body's needs created an internal struggle that became increasingly difficult to manage. The simulation continued for another hour, with Maria's squad successfully completing each objective despite their leader's hidden struggle. Other squads in the company faced their own challenges as the desert heat took its toll on Marines throughout the formation. Several had already been evacuated due to heat exhaustion, but Maria was determined not to join their ranks. As the exercise moved into its final phase, the company assembled for a formal ceremony that would conclude the training event. 500 Marines formed up in perfect formation on the parade ground adjacent to the training facility. The ceremony was designed to reinforce unit cohesion and recognize outstanding performance during the exercise. Maria took her position among the staff sergeants, standing at attention as Lieutenant Colonel Thompson prepared to address the assembled troops. The formation stretched across the parade ground in neat lines, with each Marine maintaining the rigid posture expected during formal ceremonies. The sight of 500 Marines standing in perfect unity had always filled Maria with pride and a sense of belonging to something greater than herself. The heat radiating from the concrete parade ground created shimmer waves that made the formation appear to ripple like water. Maria tried to focus on Lieutenant Colonel Thompson's voice as he began his remarks, but found herself struggling to understand his words. The symptoms she had been fighting all day were intensifying rapidly, and she realized that she was losing the battle to maintain her composure. "Today, you have proven yourselves worthy of the title Marine," Thompson declared, his voice carrying across the formation. "You have faced adversity and emerged stronger. You have demonstrated the values that define our Corps: honor, courage, and commitment." Maria felt a strange disconnect between the inspiring words and her current reality. She had always embodied those values, but today she felt as though she was failing to live up to the standards she had set for herself. The internal conflict between her dedication to duty and her body's obvious need for medical attention created a psychological burden that compounded her physical distress. As the ceremony continued, Maria noticed that her peripheral vision was beginning to fade. The Marines standing beside her seemed to blur at the edges, and she had to concentrate intensely just to remain standing. Her breathing became shallow and rapid, despite her efforts to control it. She realized that she was experiencing symptoms that could not be ignored much longer. The formation stood at attention for what felt like hours, but was actually only 20 minutes. During formal ceremonies, Marines were expected to maintain perfect posture regardless of external conditions. Fainting during formation was considered a serious breach of military bearing, something that could follow a Marine throughout their career and impact their reputation permanently. Maria thought about the consequences of collapsing in front of 500 Marines and her commanding officers. The incident would be witnessed by every person in the company, discussed in formal reports, and potentially impact her eligibility for future promotions. More importantly, it would undermine the confidence that her Marines had placed in her leadership abilities. Despite these concerns, Maria's body was approaching its limits. The combination of heat, dehydration, and what she was beginning to suspect was a serious underlying medical condition was overwhelming her ability to maintain military bearing. She felt herself swaying slightly, fighting to remain upright through sheer force of will. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson continued his address, recognizing individual Marines who had demonstrated exceptional performance during the exercise. Maria tried to focus on his words, using them as an anchor to maintain consciousness, but found her attention drifting as her physical condition deteriorated rapidly. "The Marine Corps has always demanded excellence from those who earn the right to wear our uniform," Thompson stated. "Each of you has proven today that you possess the strength, determination, and character required to defend our nation's freedom." Maria felt a wave of emotion at these words, remembering why she had chosen to serve her country and the pride she had always felt in being a Marine. She thought about her sister Carmen, who would be devastated to learn that her role model had shown weakness in front of her peers. She thought about the young Marines under her command who looked to her as an example of what they could achieve through dedication and perseverance. The internal struggle reached a crescendo as Maria realized that she could no longer maintain her position in formation. Her vision was fading rapidly. Her breathing had become labored despite her efforts to control it, and she felt an overwhelming sensation of weakness spreading through her entire body. The moment she had been dreading throughout the day was about to arrive, and there was nothing she could do to prevent it. As Lieutenant Colonel Thompson reached the climax of his speech, emphasizing the bonds that united all Marines regardless of rank or background, Maria felt her knees begin to buckle. The parade ground seemed to tilt beneath her feet, and the voices around her became distant echoes. She made one final attempt to maintain her military bearing, drawing upon reserves of strength that she didn't know she possessed. The last thing Maria remembered was the sound of Lieutenant Colonel Thompson's voice declaring, "Marines, you have shown today that you are ready for any challenge our nation might ask you to face." The irony of those words was not lost on her as consciousness slipped away and she collapsed onto the concrete parade ground in front of 500 Marines. The silence that followed Maria's collapse was deafening. 500 Marines, who moments before had been listening to their commanding officer's inspiring words about strength and perseverance, now stared at their fallen comrade lying motionless on the concrete parade ground. The formation that had stood in perfect military precision suddenly seemed fragile and human. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson's voice caught in his throat as he witnessed one of his most reliable staff sergeants collapse during what should have been a moment of triumph. His first instinct was to rush to her aid, but military protocol demanded that he maintain control of the formation while medical personnel responded to the emergency. The weight of command had never felt heavier than in that moment. Corporal Martinez was the first to break ranks, rushing to Maria's side despite the breach of military protocol his actions represented. His respect for his staff sergeant outweighed any concern about potential consequences for leaving formation without permission. As he knelt beside Maria's unconscious form, he could see that her breathing was shallow and her skin had taken on a pale, almost grayish color that suggested serious medical distress. "Corpsman!" Martinez shouted, his voice carrying across the parade ground with an urgency that cut through the stunned silence. "We need medical assistance immediately!" Private Jenkins, who had spent the entire day watching Maria with growing concern, felt tears forming in his eyes as he looked at the woman who had become his mentor and inspiration. Throughout the grueling exercise, she had pushed herself beyond reasonable limits rather than show any sign of weakness in front of her Marines. Her dedication to duty had literally brought her to the point of collapse. The company's medical team rushed onto the parade ground with their equipment, immediately beginning assessment and treatment procedures. Navy Corpsman First Class Peterson, who had served alongside Maria during their deployment to Afghanistan, recognized the severity of her condition and began coordinating with medical facilities off base for emergency transportation. "Her pulse is weak and irregular," Peterson reported to Lieutenant Colonel Thompson. "Blood pressure is dangerously low. We need to get her to a hospital immediately." As the medical team worked to stabilize Maria, something extraordinary began to happen within the formation. Without any orders or direction from their officers, Marines throughout the company began to spontaneously demonstrate their respect for their fallen comrade. It started with a single Marine in the rear rank who came to attention and rendered a crisp salute toward Maria's position. The gesture spread through the formation like ripples across a pond. One by one, then row by row, 500 Marines came to attention and raised their right hands in perfect military salutes. Officers and enlisted personnel, veterans with decades of service, and young Marines still proving themselves, all united in a silent tribute to a warrior who had given everything she had for her fellow Marines. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson, despite his concern for proper military protocol, found himself deeply moved by the spontaneous display of respect. He had served in the Marine Corps for over 20 years and had never witnessed anything quite like what was unfolding before his eyes. The salutes were not ordered or expected, but rather emerged from the genuine admiration and respect that Maria had earned through her years of selfless service. Private Jenkins struggled to maintain his military bearing as he held his salute, remembering every interaction he had experienced with Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. She had taken him under her wing when he arrived at the unit, teaching him not just the technical skills required of a Marine, but the values and character that separated ordinary soldiers from true warriors. Her collapse represented the ultimate sacrifice of personal welfare for the good of the Corps. The silence on the parade ground was broken only by the sound of the approaching ambulance that would transport Maria to the base hospital. The medical team had managed to establish an intravenous line and were monitoring her vital signs, but her condition remained critical. Peterson's experience told him that Maria's collapse was not simply heat exhaustion, but likely the result of a serious underlying medical condition that had been exacerbated by the day's physical demands. As the ambulance crew prepared Maria for transport, the 500 Marines maintained their salutes with unwavering precision. The formation that had begun as a routine military ceremony had transformed into something much more meaningful, a testament to the bonds that unite Marines regardless of rank, background, or circumstances. Each Marine standing in tribute understood that Maria's dedication to duty represented the highest ideals of their service. Corporal Martinez refused to leave Maria's side as she was loaded into the ambulance. His request to accompany her to the hospital was initially denied by medical personnel, but Lieutenant Colonel Thompson intervened, recognizing the importance of having a familiar face with Maria when she regained consciousness. The bond between Marines extended beyond the formal chain of command to encompass genuine care and concern for each other's welfare. The formation remained at attention until the ambulance disappeared from view, carrying Maria toward medical treatment that would ultimately save her life. Only then did the salutes slowly lower, and the Marines begin to process what they had witnessed. Many would later describe the experience as one of the most moving moments of their military careers, a spontaneous demonstration of the values that defined their service. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson dismissed the formation with words that acknowledged the significance of what had occurred. "Today we witnessed the true meaning of Semper Fidelis," he told the assembled Marines. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez exemplified the Marine Corps values of honor, courage, and commitment, even when doing so came at great personal cost. Your response to her sacrifice reflects the character that makes this unit extraordinary. As the Marines dispersed, small groups formed to discuss Maria's condition and share memories of her leadership and mentorship. Stories emerged of her selfless actions during deployment, her dedication to developing junior Marines, and her unwavering commitment to mission accomplishment. The respect demonstrated through their spontaneous salutes was grounded in years of shared experiences and mutual trust. Private Jenkins found himself surrounded by other Marines who had served under Maria's leadership. Each had stories of her guidance, support, and inspiration that had shaped their development as Marines. Her influence extended far beyond her official duties to encompass the personal growth and professional development of every Marine she had encountered. At the base hospital, medical personnel worked to diagnose and treat the condition that had caused Maria's collapse. Tests revealed that she had been suffering from an undiagnosed heart condition that, combined with severe dehydration and heat stress, had pushed her cardiovascular system beyond its limits. The irony was not lost on medical staff that a Marine who had survived combat operations overseas had nearly died during a training exercise on a military base. Maria regained consciousness 3 days later to find her hospital room filled with flowers, cards, and visitors from her unit. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson was among the first to visit, bringing news of the spontaneous tribute that had followed her collapse. As he described the scene of 500 Marines standing in salute, Maria felt a mixture of embarrassment and profound gratitude for the respect her fellow Marines had shown. "Staff Sergeant, your Marines wanted you to know that your sacrifice has not gone unnoticed," Thompson told her. "The dedication you showed to duty and to your fellow Marines exemplifies everything we value in this Corps. Your collapse was not a sign of weakness, but rather the inevitable result of pushing yourself beyond human limits for the good of your Marines." The recovery process would be long and would ultimately require Maria's medical retirement from active duty. The heart condition that had caused her collapse could not be fully corrected, making her ineligible for continued military service. The news was devastating for someone who had planned to spend 20 years in the Marine Corps, but it was tempered by the knowledge that her service had made a lasting impact on hundreds of Marines. Private Jenkins visited Maria regularly during her recovery, bringing updates from the unit and expressing his gratitude for her mentorship. "Staff Sergeant, you taught me that being a Marine means putting others before yourself," he told her during one visit. "Watching 500 Marines salute you on that parade ground showed me that your leadership made a difference in all our lives." The story of Maria's collapse and the spontaneous tribute that followed spread throughout the Marine Corps, becoming a powerful example of the bonds that unite Marines across all ranks and backgrounds. Military publications featured articles about the incident, and it became part of leadership training curricula at various military schools. The image of 500 Marines standing in silent salute to their fallen comrade captured the essence of military service and sacrifice. Maria's medical retirement ceremony months later was attended by hundreds of Marines, many of whom had traveled great distances to honor her service. The ceremony included formal recognition of her contributions to the Corps and her influence on the Marines she had led throughout her career. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson presented her with commendations that acknowledged both her combat service and her dedication to developing future Marine leaders. As Maria reflected on her military career during the retirement ceremony, she realized that her collapse on the parade ground had not been an ending, but rather a different kind of beginning. Her influence on the Marines she had served with would continue long after her departure from active duty. The values she had embodied and taught would be passed on to future generations of Marines through the junior personnel she had mentored. The spontaneous salute of 500 Marines had demonstrated that true leadership is measured not by rank or position, but by the respect earned through selfless service and dedication to others. Maria's legacy would live on in every Marine who had learned from her example, carrying forward the values that had driven her to push beyond human limits for the good of her fellow warriors.